A few days ago, my daughter reached out to me after 17 years of silence, asking if I'd like to meet her daughter, my granddaughter. She called out of the blue, and I told her flat out that I didn't care about either of them and to never contact me again. Now, I'm wondering if I might have been the bad guy in this whole situation. I'll give you some background so you can understand where I'm coming from. I'm in my 60s now. I was once married to my ex-wife, Karen, and we had a daughter together. Let's call her Emily. Our marriage had its ups and downs, like most do, but I was really close to Emily back then. Unfortunately, things between Karen and me started to unravel, and that's when I made a huge mistake, one that still haunts me today. I got involved with someone from work. Her name was Sarah, and she was going through a terrible time in her life, stuck in an abusive marriage. We worked together and, over time, got close. I offered her emotional support, which escalated into something more. I regret the affair, but I don't regret helping her get out of that toxic situation. With my support, she gathered the courage to divorce her husband, who's now in jail. The affair itself fizzled out quickly after that, but I was just glad Sarah got out of her dangerous marriage. In the end, that part of it felt right. But when Karen found out about the affair, things blew up in ways I hadn't fully anticipated. She was furious, which I understood. But what really tore me apart was the way she poisoned Emily against me. Our daughter was only 15 at the time, old enough to understand betrayal but young enough to be deeply influenced by her mother's anger. Karen told Emily all kinds of awful things about me. I admitted that I'd made a mistake, but it didn't change the fact that my daughter started to drift away from me. I remember the day Emily told me she didn't want to speak to me anymore, said she was done with me for good. It was like someone had ripped my heart out. I begged her not to do it, to reconsider, but she was firm. That day is burned into my memory like a scar I'll never be rid of. Time kept moving, though. A year passed, and despite my best efforts to reach out, Emily held fast to her decision. After that, I gave up. I later heard through mutual friends that Karen had remarried to a really nice guy, which gave me some hope. I thought maybe, with a good man in her life, Karen would mellow out and encourage Emily to reconnect with me. But that never happened. Eventually, I moved to another state to start over. I built a new life for myself, one without my daughter in it. I've come to terms with it, for the most part, but there's still this lingering sadness in the background, like a dull ache I can't quite shake. I've retired now. My parents are gone. My brother passed away a couple of years ago, and really, the only family I have left is my sister and my dog. I don't expect much else out of life. Honestly, I'm just waiting for my time to come. Then, out of nowhere, Emily called me a few hours ago. It was the first time I'd heard her voice in almost 2 decades, but instead of feeling any joy or relief, I felt nothing. It was strange. She sounded upset, crying even, but it didn't affect me. We caught up on our lives. She's married now, has a daughter who's 12. She apologized for cutting me out of her life, saying that her mom had been the one encouraging her to reconnect. Apparently, Karen felt guilty about how everything went down all those years ago. Emily said her daughter was always asking about Grandpa and wanted to meet me. But I just didn't feel anything. Not guilt, not happiness, nothing. After we finished talking, I told her that I didn't care about her or her daughter and that she should never call me again. Then I hung up. I'll admit, I'd had way too much to drink that night. I was drunk, and what I said wasn't the kindest or most well-thought-out response. After reading some online posts about whether or not I was in the wrong, I realized most people thought I was. They called me an asshole, and honestly, I can't really argue with that. So, I decided to call Emily back. Surprisingly, she answered right away. I apologized for what I'd said, but she told me it wasn't necessary. She didn't seem to hold it against me, which made me feel even worse. I ended up sending her a link to a post I had written about the whole thing, explaining how strangers on the internet had judged me. I told her they all thought I was in the wrong, but again, she reassured me, saying I wasn't an asshole. She broke down crying once more during that call, and it tore me up inside. I told her she was welcome to come visit me anytime in the next few months before I moved out of the country with my sister. We've decided to spend our remaining years in a farmhouse that our parents left us in their home country. It's peaceful, quiet, and a world away from all the noise of the life I've built here. I sent Emily my address, and she said she'd come by with her husband and daughter by the end of next week. She even asked if they could stay for a few days, and I said they were more than welcome to. My place is big enough to accommodate them for as long as they wanted. A week later, just like she said, Emily showed up at my house with her husband and their daughter, Lily. I hadn't really thought much about how I'd feel seeing them, but when they pulled up in the driveway, I felt a weird mix of anxiety and indifference. I saw them step out of the car, and that was the first time I laid eyes on my granddaughter. She was 12, a spitting image of Emily at that age, which hit me harder than I expected. The resemblance was uncanny, same bright eyes, same curious smile. It was like seeing my daughter all over again, but through the eyes of a stranger. We spent the first couple of days just catching up, small talk mostly. It was awkward at first, but I tried to make the best of it. Lily was sweet, always asking me questions about my life, my dog, and the farm. I could tell she was eager to get to know me, to understand who her grandfather was, but I couldn't bring myself to fully engage with her. I answered her questions, showed her around the property, but there was this distance I couldn't bridge. It was like I had a wall up, and no matter how hard she tried, I wasn't willing to let it down. Emily, on the other hand, seemed a little more reserved. She'd talk to me, but there was always this unspoken tension between us, like neither of us really knew how to start fixing what had been broken for so long. Her husband, Mark, was a nice enough guy. Quiet, respectful, he didn't push anything, just kind of hung back and let Emily and Lily do most of the talking. One evening, after Lily had gone to bed, Emily and I finally had a moment alone. We sat out on the porch, watching the sun dip behind the hills, casting the whole sky in this soft, golden light. It was peaceful, but the silence between us felt heavy. After a while, Emily spoke up. "Dad," she said, her voice quiet, almost hesitant. "I know it's been a long time, and I don't expect things to just go back to the way they were. But I want to try, you know. For Lily's sake, and for ours." I looked at her, and I could see the hope in her eyes, but all I felt was exhaustion. I was tired of the past, tired of carrying around all that hurt, and tired of pretending like any of this really mattered anymore. I took a deep breath, trying to figure out how to say what I needed to say without crushing her. "Emily," I started, choosing my words carefully, "I'm glad you came, and it's been nice seeing you again, but I'm not sure I can do this. I don't feel the way you want me to feel. I don't know how to be a grandfather, or even a dad, anymore. It's been too long. That part of me, it's just gone." Her face fell, and I could see the tears welling up in her eyes. I hated hurting her, but I had to be honest. I wasn't going to lie and pretend like I could magically step back into her life as if nothing had happened. "I'm not trying to hurt you," I continued, "but I've moved on. I've built a life for myself, and I'm at peace with how things are. I don't need anything more than that." Emily wiped at her eyes, her voice shaky as she tried to hold it together. "But Lily, she's your granddaughter. She deserves to know you. I don't want her growing up without family, like I did." Her words stung, and for a moment, I felt a pang of guilt. But the truth was, I didn't feel any real connection to Lily, no matter how much I tried. It wasn't her fault, but the bond just wasn't there. "I get that," I said softly, "but you have your family now. You've built a good life with Mark and Lily. You don't need me to complete that picture. I'm happy for you, really, but I don't think I can be the person you want me to be." She didn't say anything after that, just sat there staring out at the horizon, tears quietly rolling down her cheeks. I felt terrible, but at the same time, there was a strange sense of relief. It was like I'd finally spoken the truth I'd been holding in for so long. The rest of their stay went by without much incident. We kept things light, focused on the simple joys, Lily playing with my dog, us sharing meals together, enjoying the fresh air of the countryside. But the weight of that conversation hung between me and Emily, unspoken but ever present. She tried to put on a brave face, but I could tell she was hurt. On the last day of their visit, just before they were about to leave, Emily pulled me aside again. "I don't want this to be the end," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know you said you're not interested in being a grandfather, but if you ever change your mind, we'll always be here. The door is always open, Dad." I nodded, not really sure what else to say. I appreciated her offer, but deep down, I knew it wasn't going to happen. I wasn't built for this anymore. Too much time had passed, too much had been lost along the way. We hugged briefly before she got into the car, and as I watched them drive away, I couldn't help but feel a mix of sadness and relief. This visit felt like closure, a final chapter in a story that had long since run its course. A few weeks later, I packed up my things and moved to the farmhouse with my sister and our dog. It's quiet here, peaceful. The kind of peace I've been looking for. I don't expect Emily to visit anytime soon, and I'm okay with that. We've said our goodbyes in our own way, and that's enough for me. It's been a few months now since Emily, Mark, and Lily came to visit, and as I settle into my new life at the farmhouse, I can't help but think back to that week. In a way, it feels like it happened to someone else. I'm far removed from it all, my old life, my old relationships. It's peaceful here, just me, my sister, and the dog. The days blend together, filled with the rhythm of nature, the quiet sounds of the land. But sometimes, when the nights are still and the wind rustles through the trees, I find myself replaying certain moments. I don't regret what I said to Emily, but a part of me wonders if I could have handled it differently. Could I have tried harder? Could I have found some way to reconnect, even if it didn't come naturally? But those thoughts don't linger long. I've learned to push them away. After all, what's done is done. About 2 weeks after they left, Emily sent me a text. It was brief, just a message to let me know they'd gotten home safely and that Lily had talked non-stop about her time at the farm. She mentioned that Lily had asked and they'd be coming back to visit. I didn't respond. I stared at the message for a while, unsure of what to say. There was no anger or resentment on my end, just a kind of quiet indifference. I didn't feel the pull to continue the conversation, so I simply let it be. Emily hasn't reached out since, and I think we both understand that this is the way things are now. It's not the storybook reunion she might have hoped for, but it's the reality we're living in. I've closed that chapter, and it seems like she's accepted that. Maybe it's better this way. Life doesn't always tie up neatly, and not every broken relationship gets repaired. The farm has become my sanctuary. It's far from the noise of the world I once knew, and I've embraced the solitude. My sister, Caroline, and I spend our days tending to the land, taking long walks with the dog, and enjoying the simple pleasures of a life removed from the chaos of the past. We've started fixing up the old farmhouse, making small improvements here and there, though neither of us is in a rush. There's something comforting about the slow pace, the way time seems to stretch out endlessly here. But even here, far removed from everything, betrayal lingers in the air. It's funny how betrayal stays with you, like an old scar that never fully fades. I've been betrayed before, by myself, by the choices I made, by the expectations I failed to live up to. And in a way, I feel like I've betrayed Emily, too. I betrayed the image of the father she might have held on to all these years, the one she wanted me to be for her and her daughter. But I couldn't be that person, not anymore. Maybe I never really was. Caroline doesn't say much about it, but I know she senses the weight I'm carrying. She's the quiet type, always has been. She's been through her own share of hardships, and I think that's why we understand each other so well. We don't need to talk about it, the silence between us is enough. Every now and then, though, she'll ask if I've heard from Emily. I just shake my head, and we go back to whatever task we're working on. The funny thing is, I thought that cutting ties with Emily would bring me peace, and in a way, it has. But there's also this nagging feeling, this emptiness that I can't quite name. It's not regret, exactly, but it's something close. I've always been the kind of man who believes that once a bridge is burned, you let it stay that way. But the older I get, the more I wonder if that's really the right way to go through life. Maybe there's something to be said for rebuilding, even when it feels impossible. As the weeks pass, I keep expecting a call or a text, but none come. I remind myself that this is what I wanted, what I chose. But sometimes, when I see Lily's face in my mind, I wonder what kind of relationship we could have had if I'd just allowed myself to feel something. If I'd let my guard down, even for a moment. She was such a bright, inquisitive kid, and I could see in her eyes that she genuinely wanted to know me. But I couldn't let her in. I didn't know how. Caroline and I have been talking more about our parents lately. It's funny how, after so many years, the memories of them come flooding back out here. This farmhouse was theirs, after all. They left it to us, and sometimes it feels like their presence is still here, lingering in the walls, in the fields. They had their own flaws, their own mistakes, but they never gave up on family. I think about that a lot now, how they always found a way to forgive, to make things right. Maybe that's something I never learned. The seasons are starting to change now, and with them, I feel something shifting in me, too. I'm not sure if it's regret or just the weight of time pressing down on me, but I've been thinking more and more about reaching out to Emily. I don't know what I'd say, and I'm not even sure she'd want to hear from me after everything. But there's this part of me that wonders if it's not too late, after all. If maybe, just maybe, there's a sliver of hope left for us to find some kind of peace. But for now, I let the days pass. I walk the fields with Caroline and the dog, and I try to focus on the present. The past feels far away, like another life, but it's always there, lurking just beneath the surface. Betrayal has a way of doing that, sticking with you, even when you think you've moved on. The air out here on the farm has a way of clearing your mind, making things seem simpler, at least for a little while. Caroline and I have fallen into a routine. Mornings are for working the land, there's always something that needs tending to, and it keeps my hands busy. Afternoons, we sit on the porch, watch the sun stretch across the fields, and let the quiet settle in. I think that's why I came here in the first place, to find quiet. But even in the silence, there are things I can't shake. I still think about that last conversation with Emily. The way her voice cracked when I told her I wasn't interested in being a grandfather. It's not that I don't love her or that I don't care. It's just, complicated. Too much time, too much damage. People like to think that love can bridge any gap, heal any wound. But that's not always true. Sometimes, the hurt just runs too deep. Sometimes, you can't go back, even if you want to. But then there's Lily. I can't help but wonder what she thinks of all this, of me. She's just a kid, caught in the middle of something she can't possibly understand. When I looked into her eyes that week, I saw a lot of questions I wasn't ready to answer. Maybe I never will be. But still, the thought of her asking about me, wondering who her grandfather is, sticks with me. It's strange, because I've never felt that pull before, not even with Emily when she was growing up. I was always there, physically at least, but emotionally. I don't know. Maybe I've always been distant, even when I didn't mean to be. One evening, about a month after they visited, I was sitting on the porch, sipping a beer and watching the sky fade into dusk. Caroline came out and sat beside me, the two of us sitting in comfortable silence for a while. She's always known when to give me space and when to speak. That night, she finally spoke up. "You've been thinking about Emily a lot, haven't you?" she asked, not looking at me, but staring out at the horizon like I was. I nodded, not really sure how to put it into words. Yeah. It's hard not to. Caroline sighed, leaning back in her chair. You know, it doesn't have to be like this. You could reach out. It wouldn't hurt to try. I didn't say anything at first. Part of me knew she was right, but the other part, the part that spent the last 17 years burying those feelings, wasn't so sure. What would reaching out even accomplish? Would it change anything? Would it fix what's broken, or would it just drag up all the old pain? I don't know, Caroline, I said finally. I think it's too late for that. Too much has happened. She turned to look at me, her expression soft but firm. It's only too late if you decide it is. You're the one holding back, not her. She's made it clear she wants to fix things. You're the one standing in the way. Her words hit me harder than I expected. Maybe I had been standing in the way, letting my own guilt and bitterness keep me from seeing things clearly. But at the same time, it wasn't just about me. Emily had made her choices too, and those choices left scars I wasn't sure I could heal from. I'm just not sure I have anything left to give, I admitted. I've been living with this distance for so long. I don't even know how to bridge it anymore. Caroline reached over and put her hand on mine, giving it a gentle squeeze. You don't have to have all the answers, you just have to try. Emily's not asking for perfection. She's asking for a chance. We sat there in silence after that, her words hanging in the air between us. I wasn't ready to make any promises, not even to myself. But something inside me had shifted, even if just a little. Maybe she was right. Maybe it wasn't too late after all. A few days later, I found myself sitting at the kitchen table with my phone in front of me, staring at Emily's contact info. It felt strange to be the one reaching out after all these years. I didn't even know what I was going to say. Apologize, maybe. But for what? For the years of silence, for not being the father she needed, for telling her I didn't care about her or her daughter. There was too much to unpack, too much history to cover in one simple phone call. But I picked up the phone anyway. I dialed her number, and after a few rings, she answered. Hello. Her voice was soft, cautious, like she wasn't sure what to expect from me. I cleared my throat, trying to gather my thoughts. Hey, Emily. It's me. There was a pause, and for a second, I thought maybe she wasn't going to respond. But then she spoke. Dad? Is everything okay? I could hear the concern in her voice, and it made my chest tighten. Yeah, everything's fine. I wanted to talk. I've been thinking about our conversation when you were here, and I think I owe you an apology. There was another pause, and I could almost hear the wheels turning in her head, trying to figure out what had changed. You don't have to apologize, Dad, she said quietly. I know it's been hard for both of us. I shook my head, even though she couldn't see me. No, I do. I've been stuck in my own head for too long, and I didn't give you the chance you deserved. I'm not sure I can be the father or the grandfather you want me to be, but I want to try. If you'll let me. Her voice cracked when she answered, and I could tell she was holding back tears. Of course I'll let you, Dad. I've always wanted that. We didn't talk for much longer after that. It was a short conversation, but it felt like a step forward. A small step, but a step nonetheless. I don't know what the future holds for me and Emily, or for my relationship with Lily, but for the first time in a long time, I feel like maybe there's a way forward. It's not going to be easy, and I'm still not sure what kind of role I can play in their lives, but I'm willing to try. And maybe that's enough. After that phone call with Emily, I felt a strange mix of relief and anxiety. It wasn't a big, dramatic moment, no grand declarations or emotional breakthroughs, but it felt like something had shifted, like a crack had formed in the wall I'd built around myself. It was a small crack, but enough to let a little light in. In the days that followed, I kept myself busy with the farm, as I always do. There's something about working with your hands that clears your mind. The repetitive tasks, mending fences, tending to the garden, feeding the animals, kept me grounded, gave me time to think without getting lost in my own head. But every now and then, I'd catch myself wondering about Emily and Lily. Was Emily sitting at her kitchen table, thinking about that call? Was Lily still asking about her grandfather? And if so, what did Emily tell her? Caroline could tell something had changed, too. She didn't press me, but she'd give me these knowing looks, the kind that siblings give when they know you're going through something but don't want to push too hard. One evening, as we sat on the porch, she finally broke the silence. "So," she said, her voice casual but curious, "you talked to Emily?" I nodded, not looking up from the whittling I'd been doing. "Yeah. We talked." Caroline smiled softly, folding her hands in her lap. "And how do you feel about that?" I shrugged, though I knew that wasn't a real answer. "I don't know. Better, I guess." It wasn't much, but it felt like something. "That's because it is something," Caroline replied, her voice gentle but firm. "It's a start, and that's more than you had before." She was right, of course. It was a start. But I was still hesitant, still unsure of where it was all going. There was a part of me that didn't want to get too invested, that didn't want to open the door too wide just yet. I'd spent so many years convincing myself that I didn't need that connection, that I was better off without it. Changing that mindset wasn't going to happen overnight. A few weeks later, I got a text from Emily. It was a simple message, just asking how I was doing and letting me know that Lily had been asking about me again. She included a picture of Lily holding up a drawing she'd made of the farm, based on what she remembered from their visit. The drawing wasn't much, just a few stick figures and a dog in the middle of a green field, but it hit me harder than I expected. Seeing that Lily had taken the time to draw something from her short time here made me feel connected in a way I hadn't before. I stared at the picture for a long time, my thumb hovering over the keyboard, trying to figure out how to respond. After a while, I typed out a short message thanking her for the drawing and saying that I was doing fine. I also told her that if Lily wanted to, she could call me anytime. I wasn't sure if that was the right thing to say, but it felt like the least I could do. Emily responded quickly, telling me that Lily would love that and that she'd give me a call over the weekend. I didn't know how to feel about it. On the one hand, I was nervous, talking to a 12-year-old girl, especially one who was technically my granddaughter, felt foreign to me. But on the other hand, there was a small part of me that felt curious. Maybe even hopeful. That Saturday, my phone rang around noon, and sure enough, it was Emily's number. I hesitated for a second before picking up, but when I did, I heard Lily's voice on the other end, full of excitement. "Hi, Grandpa," she said, her voice light and full of energy. "It's me, Lily. Mom said I could call you." I smiled, even though she couldn't see me. "Hey there, Lily. It's nice to hear from you." We spent the next 20 minutes or so talking about everything and nothing. She told me about school, her friends, and the dog she'd been begging her parents to get. I asked her about her drawing and how she remembered so much detail from the farm, and she told me all about how she loved to draw and paint. The conversation flowed easier than I'd expected, and before I knew it, the call was coming to an end. "Can I call you again sometime?" she asked, her voice hopeful. I paused for a moment, feeling that familiar hesitation rise up inside me. But then I thought about the way her voice had lit up when she talked about the farm, and how easy it had been to just talk, without any of the baggage that came with my relationship with Emily. "Of course you can, Lily," I said. "You can call me anytime." After we hung up, I sat there for a long time, staring out at the fields. The conversation had been so simple, but it left me feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time, a sense of connection, however small. Maybe I wasn't cut out to be the kind of grandfather who showed up at every school play or birthday party, but I could be this, a voice on the other end of the phone, someone she could talk to. Over the next few weeks, Lily called me a few more times. Sometimes it was just for a quick chat, and other times, we'd talk for a bit longer about whatever was on her mind. Each time, I found myself looking forward to her calls a little more. It wasn't much, but it was something, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was starting to mend a bridge that I hadn't even realized I'd wanted to rebuild. Emily and I didn't talk much during this time, but that was okay. I think she understood that the bond one was forming with Lily was its own kind of healing, for both of us. She gave me the space I needed to figure things out at my own pace, and for that, I was grateful. One afternoon, about a month after Lily had started calling me regularly, I got a message from Emily. She said they were thinking about coming to visit the farm again, maybe over the summer, if I was okay with it. I stared at the message for a long time, feeling that familiar tug of uncertainty. But then I thought about Lily, about the easy conversations we'd had, and I realized that maybe, just maybe, I was ready for more. The summer rolled around quicker than I expected. The days were long and hot on the farm, with the sun hanging in the sky like it didn't want to leave. Caroline and I spent most of our mornings working the fields, and the afternoons resting in the shade or inside where it was cooler. We kept busy, but I'd be lying if I said I wasn't thinking about Emily and Lily's visit. It was always in the back of my mind, gnawing at me in the quiet moments. I wasn't sure how things would go this time around. The last visit had felt final, like a book being closed on a chapter of my life I didn't want to revisit. But now, with Lily reaching out to me regularly and Emily making the effort to rebuild something between us, I couldn't help but feel like maybe there was more left to be written. I didn't want to get my hopes up, but I also didn't want to shut the door completely. Not anymore. About a week before they were supposed to arrive, Emily called to check in. We hadn't talked much since our brief conversation months ago, so hearing her voice again was strange. Not bad, just strange. It felt like a reminder of everything we'd been through, but also of how far we still had to go. "Hey, Dad," she said, her tone soft but upbeat. "I just wanted to make sure we're still on for next week. Lily's been counting down the days." I smiled at that, even though I wasn't quite sure how to respond. "Yeah, we're still on. The place is ready for you." She paused for a moment, like she wasn't sure how to take my response. "I appreciate it. I know this probably isn't easy for you, but it means a lot to us, especially to Lily." I didn't know how to explain to her that it wasn't just Lily who had started to mean something to me. I hadn't fully figured out how I felt about Emily yet, but things were changing, slowly. Maybe it was Lily's innocence, or the way she saw me with fresh eyes, but it had made me rethink a lot of things. "It's fine, Emily. We'll figure it out," I said simply, not wanting to get too deep into things over the phone. She didn't push, thankfully. "Okay, well, we'll be there next Friday. Mark's excited too, and I think it'll be good for all of us." The days leading up to their visit were quiet, almost too quiet. I found myself getting more restless than usual, pacing around the farmhouse or fussing with things that didn't really need fixing. Caroline noticed, of course, but she didn't say much. She just gave me that same knowing look she always did, like she could see what was going on inside my head without me saying a word. When Friday finally came, I was out on the porch, nursing a cup of coffee, when I saw their car pull up the long dirt driveway. My heart did this strange little flip, like I was nervous, which caught me off guard. I wasn't used to feeling that way anymore, not for anyone. But there it was. Emily got out first, waving as she walked toward the house, and Lily followed close behind, practically bouncing with excitement. Mark brought up the rear, smiling politely but staying quiet, as he always did. He was a good man, I could see that, but we didn't have much in common, and I was okay with that. "Grandpa!" Lily yelled as soon as she saw me, running up the steps to give me a hug. I hadn't realized how much I'd missed her energy until that moment. I hugged her back, a little stiffly at first, but then more naturally as it sunk in that this little girl genuinely cared about me. It wasn't just obligation or politeness, she actually wanted to be around me. That was a feeling I hadn't had in a long, long time. "Hey there, kiddo," I said, patting her back before letting go. "You ready for some farm life?" She grinned up at me, her eyes wide with excitement. "Yeah. Mom said we can help out with the animals and everything." Emily stood by, watching the interaction with a soft smile on her face. I could tell she was trying to gauge where I was at emotionally, but I wasn't ready to let her in just yet. One step at a time. "Come on inside," I said, motioning toward the door. "Caroline's got some lemonade waiting for you all. She's been looking forward to seeing you." We spent the rest of that day settling in. Lily was all over the place, wanting to see everything and help with every little task, while Emily and Mark took things slower, trying to give me space without making it awkward. It was clear that they weren't here to push anything, which I appreciated. There was no rush to talk about the past, no pressure to fix things right away. It was just easy, in a way I hadn't expected. That evening, after dinner, we all sat out on the porch, enjoying the cool breeze as the sun set over the hills. Caroline had gone to bed early, leaving just the four of us. Lily was curled up in a chair with one of the farm dogs, her eyes drooping as the day's excitement caught up with her. Mark and Emily sat quietly, sipping their drinks and taking in the peaceful atmosphere. After a while, Emily broke the silence. "Dad," she said softly, her voice careful, "I know we've got a lot to work through, but I just want to say thank you. For letting us come, for giving this a chance. I didn't know if you would, and I'm grateful." I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time in a long time, I saw the girl I used to know. The one who had been hurt, who had felt abandoned, but who still wanted to make things right. There was pain there, sure, but there was also hope. "I wasn't sure if I could," I admitted, my voice low, "but I'm glad you're here. I don't know where this is going, but I'm willing to see what happens." She nodded, her eyes glassy with unshed tears. "That's all I wanted, Dad. Just a chance." Mark stayed silent through the whole exchange, giving us the space we needed. I respected that about him. He knew this was between me and Emily, and he didn't try to insert himself into it. He was just there, steady and reliable, like a quiet support in the background. We didn't talk much after that. There wasn't much more to say, really. The hard part was still ahead, but for now, we'd found a small bit of peace in the quiet of the evening, and that was enough. The next morning, the sun rose early, casting long shadows over the fields. I was up before anyone else, the familiar sounds of the farm pulling me out of bed. It felt good to be out there, in the cool morning air, with nothing but the steady rhythm of chores to keep me company. I knew Emily and her family would wake up soon, and I wanted to have a few quiet moments to myself before the day really began. I was out by the barn, feeding the animals, when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around, expecting to see Caroline, but it was Lily. She was still in her pajamas, her hair a little wild from sleep, but she had that same eager expression on her face, like she was ready to dive into the day. "Morning, Grandpa," she said, bouncing on her toes. "Can I help?" I smiled at her enthusiasm. "Sure thing, kiddo. Grab that bucket of feed over there and follow me." Lily did as I asked, struggling a bit with the heavy bucket but refusing to give up. It reminded me of Emily at that age, always determined to prove she could handle anything. We spent the next hour or so working together, and for the first time in a long time, I felt lighter. There was something about her energy, her curiosity, that made everything feel a little less heavy. As we walked back to the house, Lily started peppering me with questions, about the farm, about my dog, and even about what I was like when I was younger. It was the kind of conversation I hadn't had in years, and I found myself answering her without hesitation. It was easy with her, in a way it hadn't been with Emily for so long. Mom says you used to be really good at fixing things, Lily said, glancing up at me as we walked. Can you teach me? I chuckled, surprised by the question. Yeah, I can show you a few things. What do you want to learn? She shrugged, her face lighting up with excitement. Anything. I want to learn everything. That was the thing about kids, they were always so eager, so ready to soak up everything the world had to offer. It was hard not to get caught up in that energy, even for someone like me, who had spent years closing himself off from it. By the time we got back to the house, Emily and Mark were awake and sitting on the porch, sipping coffee. Emily smiled when she saw us coming up the path, and I could tell she was relieved to see that things were going smoothly. There was still tension between us, still unspoken words hanging in the air, but it felt like we were moving in the right direction. The day passed in a blur of activity. We showed Lily how to help with the animals, gave her a tour of the farm's smaller hidden spots, and even let her try her hand at gardening. Mark, as usual, kept to the sidelines, but I could tell he was enjoying the peace and quiet of the countryside. Emily seemed more at ease too, like the farm was helping her unwind in a way she hadn't in a long time. That evening, after dinner, Emily and I found ourselves alone again. Lily had gone off with Caroline to explore the garden, and Mark was cleaning up inside. We sat on the porch, just like the night before, but this time, the silence between us didn't feel as heavy. I can see Lily really loves it here, Emily said, her voice soft. She hasn't stopped talking about the farm since we left last time. I nodded, watching the horizon. She's a good kid. You've done a good job with her. Emily smiled, but there was something bittersweet in her expression. I just wish. I wish things had been different between us. I know it's too late to change the past, but I can't help but wonder what it would have been like if we'd stayed close. Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to brush it off, to say that things happen the way they do and there's no point dwelling on it. But another part of me, the part that had been softening ever since Lily came into my life, knew that wasn't the right thing to say. I've been thinking about that too, I admitted, my voice low. I've spent a lot of years convincing myself that it was too late, that we couldn't fix what was broken. But, maybe I was wrong. Maybe there's still time to figure this out, even if it's not the way we expected. Emily looked at me, her eyes searching mine for some sign of sincerity. Do you really mean that, Dad? I don't want to push you into something you're not ready for. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her question. I don't know if I'm ready, but I want to try. I don't want to spend the rest of my life regretting what we could have had. I know I haven't been the father you needed, and I'm sorry for that. But I want to be here now, if you'll let me. Her eyes filled with tears, but this time, they were tears of relief, not sadness. She reached out and squeezed my hand, and for the first time in years, I felt like we were really connecting. Not just as two people trying to navigate the aftermath of betrayal, but as father and daughter. I've always wanted that, Dad, she said, her voice thick with emotion. I've always wanted you to be a part of our lives. We sat there in silence for a while after that, letting the moment settle between us. It wasn't a perfect resolution, and there was still a lot of healing to be done, but it felt like we were finally on the same page. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was carrying the weight of the past alone. The next few days passed by quickly, and before I knew it, it was time for Emily and her family to head back home. Lily was already talking about the next time they'd come to visit, and I found myself looking forward to it more than I expected. When they were getting ready to leave, Emily pulled me aside one last time. Thank you, Dad, she said quietly. For everything. I know it's been hard, but I really believe we're going to be okay. I nodded, feeling a lump rise in my throat. I think so too, Emily. Take care of yourself, and let me know when you want to come back. The door's always open. We hugged briefly, and then they were gone, driving down the long dirt road that led back to the main highway. As I watched their car disappear into the distance, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, a sense of hope. I still wasn't sure where things would go from here. I knew there would be bumps along the way, and I knew that some wounds would take time to heal. But for the first time in a long time, I was willing to face that uncertainty, to take the steps I'd been too afraid to take for so many years. Betrayal had shaped so much of my life, but maybe it didn't have to define the rest of it. Maybe, just maybe, there was still time to build something new. After Emily and her family left, the farm felt quieter than usual. It was a strange kind of silence, one that wasn't entirely unwelcome, but it wasn't the same as before. I had gotten used to hearing Lily's laughter echoing across the fields and her endless questions about the animals or the plants. Without her around, the stillness felt heavier. Caroline noticed the change in me, too. She didn't say anything right away, but I could tell by the way she watched me that she knew something had shifted. We'd always been close, and she had a way of reading me without words. One evening, while we were sitting on the porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, she finally spoke. "You seem lighter," she said, sipping her tea and glancing over at me. "Like something's lifted off your shoulders." I nodded, not really sure how to put it into words. "I guess I feel that way. It's been a long time since I've let myself feel anything about all this. But I think I'm starting to see things differently." Caroline smiled, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "It's about time. You've been carrying that weight around for years. I'm glad you finally decided to let some of it go." I didn't say much after that, but I knew she was right. The weight I'd been holding onto for so long was starting to feel a little lighter, like I'd finally taken the first step towards something resembling closure. It wasn't perfect, and I knew there would still be days when the old feelings of guilt and regret would creep back in. But now, for the first time in years, there was a path forward, and that was something I hadn't expected. In the weeks that followed, I stayed in touch with Emily and Lily more than I had before. Lily called me a couple of times, and each conversation was a little easier than the last. We didn't talk about anything earth-shattering, just little things, like how her school was going or what she was drawing that week. But each call felt like another small step toward rebuilding something that had been lost. Emily and I texted more often, too. She didn't push for long, emotional conversations, and I appreciated that. Instead, we just exchanged simple messages, checking in on each other, sharing little updates about our lives. It felt natural, like we were slowly finding our way back to each other without forcing it. One day, I got a message from Emily that stopped me in my tracks. She told me they were thinking about moving closer to the farm. Mark had been offered a job in a nearby city, and they were considering making the move so they could be closer to me. My immediate reaction was mixed. Part of me was hesitant. I wasn't sure if I was ready for that kind of closeness, for the possibility of them being part of my everyday life. But another part of me, the part that had grown fond of Lily's calls and Emily's quiet presence, felt a sense of anticipation. I didn't respond right away. I needed time to think. That night, as I sat on the porch with Caroline, I brought it up to her. "Emily's thinking about moving closer," I said, staring out at the fields as the sun dipped below the horizon. "Mark's got a job offer in the city." Caroline raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised. "Wow, that's a big change. How do you feel about that?" I shrugged, still unsure of my own feelings. "I don't know. It's a lot to take in. I've gotten used to them being at a distance, you know. But I don't hate the idea. Maybe it wouldn't be so bad, having them closer." Caroline smiled at that, a knowing look in her eyes. "I think it would be good for you. You've spent so many years keeping people at arm's length. Maybe it's time to let them in." I nodded, but I still wasn't sure. The idea of having them nearby stirred up a lot of emotions I wasn't ready to unpack. But deep down, I knew Caroline was right. It was time to let them in, to stop holding on to the past and start building something new. A few days later, I finally responded to Emily's message. I kept it simple, telling her that if they decided to move, I'd be happy to have them closer. It wasn't an enthusiastic response, but it was honest, and I knew that was what Emily needed from me. She replied quickly, thanking me and saying they were still figuring things out, but that they were leaning toward making the move. The weeks passed, and life on the farm continued its steady rhythm. But in the back of my mind, I knew things were changing. Emily and her family were getting closer, both physically and emotionally, and that meant I had to prepare myself for a new chapter in my life, one where I was no longer so isolated, no longer hiding behind the walls I'd built. One afternoon, as I was out in the field fixing a broken fence, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, expecting another message from Emily, but this time, it was Lily. She had sent me a picture of a drawing she'd done, a picture of me, her, and my dog standing in front of the farmhouse, all smiling. Beneath it, she had written, "Can't wait to be here more often. Love you, Grandpa." I stared at the picture for a long time, feeling a warmth in my chest that I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't sure if I was ready to fully embrace being a grandfather, but in that moment, it didn't seem as impossible as it once had. Maybe I didn't need to be perfect. Maybe I just needed to be present. That evening, I sat down and wrote a message back to Lily, thanking her for the drawing and telling her I was looking forward to seeing her soon. It wasn't much, but it was a start. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was on the right path. Over the next few months, Emily and Mark made their decision. They moved closer, settling in a small town about an hour away from the farm. It wasn't too close, but it was close enough that we could see each other more often without it feeling overwhelming. Lily was ecstatic about the move, and she started coming to the farm on weekends, spending time with me and Caroline, helping out with chores and learning more about the land. Slowly but surely, my life started to shift. The farm was still my sanctuary, still the quiet place I went to clear my mind. But now, it was also a place of connection, a place where family could gather, where new memories could be made. Emily and I still had our moments, there were still unspoken things between us, still bits of the past we hadn't fully dealt with. But we were both trying, and that was what mattered. For the first time in years, I didn't feel so alone. And for the first time in years, I didn't mind. As the months went by, Emily, Mark, and Lily became a regular part of my life in ways I hadn't expected. They weren't overbearing or always around, but their presence was steady, like a soft hum in the background that I had grown accustomed to. Lily, especially, had taken a liking to the farm, and she spent most of her weekends out here, exploring every nook and cranny of the place. It was funny to see how quickly she became part of the rhythm of the land, as if she'd always belonged here. One afternoon, Lily and I were sitting on the porch after a long day of work. We'd just finished repairing a fence that had been knocked over in the last storm, and she was sipping on a lemonade, her face flushed from the heat. She looked up at me, her brow furrowed like she was thinking hard about something. "Grandpa," she said, her voice more serious than usual, "why didn't you talk to Mom for so long? She doesn't like to talk about it much, but I can tell it makes her sad sometimes." Her question caught me off guard. I wasn't expecting it, but I knew it was bound to come up eventually. I glanced down at my hands, trying to figure out how to explain something so complicated to a 12-year-old without brushing off her question. She deserved an answer, even if it wasn't a simple one. "Well," I began slowly, choosing my words carefully, "your mom and I, we had a lot of problems when she was growing up. I made mistakes, and so did she. After a while, it just got too hard to fix things, and we stopped talking. It's not that I didn't love her, it's just that sometimes, things get so broken, it feels impossible to fix." Lily nodded, her face thoughtful. "But you're talking now, right? You're trying to fix it?" I smiled at her, appreciating her optimism. "Yeah, we're trying. It's not always easy, but we're working on it. I guess that's the most important part, trying." She took a long sip of her lemonade, her eyes still fixed on me. I think you'll be okay, Grandpa. You and Mom. You just need more time. Her words, so simple and so full of hope, hit me harder than I expected. Maybe she was right. Maybe we just needed more time. After all, we'd come this far, and I hadn't thought that was possible just a year ago. Later that evening, after Emily and Mark had picked Lily up and headed back home, I sat on the porch alone, thinking about what Lily had said. It was strange how much perspective a child could bring to a situation that adults made so complicated. She saw things so clearly, so unclouded by the past. To her, it was simple: you try, and you keep trying until things get better. There wasn't any room for the kind of bitterness I had carried for so long. I realized then that I wanted to do more than just try. I wanted to really let Emily back in, to make space for her in my life, not just on the surface but in a deeper, more meaningful way. I didn't know if I could ever fully make up for the years we'd lost, but I knew I could start by being more open, more present. A few days later, I called Emily. It was a simple conversation, just a check-in at first, but as we talked, I found myself wanting to say more, to open up in a way I hadn't before. "Emily," I said, my voice a little uncertain, "I've been thinking a lot about everything. I know we've both made mistakes, and I know we've been careful not to push too hard. But I want you to know that I'm here. Really here. I want us to keep working on this, on us. Not just for Lily's sake, but for ours." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and for a moment, I wasn't sure how she would respond. But then I heard her take a deep breath. "Dad," she said softly, "that means more to me than you know. I've wanted this for so long. I've been so scared that we'd never get here, that it was too late." "It's not too late," I said, feeling more certain of that than I ever had before. "We've still got time." From that day forward, things between Emily and me started to shift. It wasn't some grand transformation overnight, but it was there, in the little things, the longer phone calls, the more frequent visits, the way we started to talk about the past without it feeling like we were opening old wounds. We were finally doing what I hadn't thought possible: we were healing. One evening, a few weeks later, Emily and Mark brought Lily out to the farm for a family dinner. Caroline had cooked a big meal, and we all sat around the table, laughing and talking like we'd done it 100 times before. There was an ease to it that I hadn't felt in years, a sense of belonging that had been missing for so long. After dinner, Lily ran off to play with the dog, and Emily and I found ourselves sitting on the porch, just the two of us, watching the last light of the day fade into the horizon. The air was cool, and the sounds of crickets filled the silence between us. For a while, we didn't say anything, just sat together in the comfortable quiet that had become our new normal. "I never thought we'd get here," Emily said after a long while, her voice soft. "I used to dream about it, you know. About us being okay again. But it always felt like just a dream." I glanced over at her, seeing the emotion in her eyes. "It's real now. And we've still got time to figure the rest out." She smiled, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't just saying the right thing, I actually believed it. We weren't perfect, and we never would be. But we were here, together, and that was enough. As the night settled in around us, I felt a sense of peace that had eluded me for so many years. The farm, which had once been my place of isolation, had become a place of connection, of family. And as I sat there with my daughter beside me, I realized that maybe, just maybe, I hadn't lost everything after all. Write a few introductory sentences about the plot to interest the listener. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe to the channel to watch my next videos and share with me your opinion, what you would do in my place.